Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to especially welcome our viewers from around the world and around the country, as a matter of fact. We do know that there are people who are watching us now in Australia, in Canada, in England, other countries in Europe. So just to say, wanted to say hello and welcome to the show, and thanks for your support of Current Issues. Of course, we welcome everybody from everywhere. I just had to welcome these viewers from around the world who basically staying up late to watch the show. So thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are going to be discussing a couple of items. In the first hour, we will be discussing Jimmy Carter's new book. It is called Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. And we will have with us tonight Professor of Law, George Bisharat. He's been on the program before, and he had written an article about the book. Now, for those of you who don't know what Jimmy Carter's new book is, I hope everyone knows who Jimmy Carter is. If we are to take some of the stuff that we see on the on TV, that probably some people don't even know who Jimmy Carter. Well, Jimmy Carter used to be a president of the United States back in the 70s. And just for those of you who know Reagan, Jimmy Carter was right before Reagan. So for these people that I've seen on Jay Leno who don't know much about politics or geography, that's who Jimmy Carter is. Now, Jimmy Carter, since he left office, he never really, he did not go fishing or go set up camp somewhere in Hawaii and just enjoy the rest of his life. On the contrary, he is working a lot more for causes around the world. As a matter of fact, he was just in New Orleans about a month ago building a house for the Habitats for Humanity. And I mean, the guy is probably about 80-some years old, and he's still going. More power to him. In his last book, though, he had written about Palestine. Now, Jimmy Carter, if anyone knows who Jimmy Carter and what he has done for Israel, probably he has done more than any American president has ever done for Israel. Number one, Jimmy Carter was the one who basically made peace between Egypt and Israel. So very much with that peace treaty has taken one of the strongest and largest and one of the most important Arab adversaries for Israel. So that's a big accomplishment for Jimmy Carter, that he had taken Egypt out of the formula of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And he has done a lot. He was the one that had basically set up the committee for the Holocaust Memorial Museum. He's the one that started it. And he has done a lot for Israel and for the Jewish people. But then, since he left office until now, he basically worked for peace, and he is a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and he basically worked for a lot of causes, and like I said, one of them is the Palestinian cause. And Jimmy Carter is a religious man, and had basically, he is more of a last week when we had Charles with us, Charles Carlson, and we talk about the Schofield Bible and Evangelist, Jimmy Carter is one of those Southern Baptists who basically believed in the chosen people, and that we are to take care of the chosen people. He said so himself. He said he was indoctrinated since he was 3 years old to believe that Israel and the fulfillment of, or the state of Israel is a fulfillment of prophecy, and these are the chosen people. But since then, ladies and gentlemen, he has done the work himself. He went over there, he's seen what's going on the ground, and he wrote about it. He wrote a book about it. And the book he wrote is very much, it's more of a historical facts that everyone knew before. It is a lot of his diaries, a lot of his dealings with people over there. It's stuff that he had written while he visited the Middle East on multiple occasions. Now, I would like to, this was a part of an article, just to let you know what we're talking about. Following his #1 New York Times bestseller, Our Endangered Values, the former president, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, offers an assessment of what must be done to bring permanent peace to Israel with dignity and justice to Palestine. President Carter, who was able to negotiate peace between Israel and Egypt, has remained deeply involved in the Middle East affairs since leaving the White House. He has stayed in touch with major players from all sides in the conflict and has made numerous trips to the Holy Land, most recently as an observer in the Palestinian elections of 2005 and 2006. In this book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, President Carter shares his intimate knowledge of the history of the Middle East and his personal experiences with the principal actors, and he addresses sensitive issues, political issues, many American officials avoid. Pulling no punches, Carter prescribes steps that must be taken for the two states to share the Holy Land without a system of apartheid or the constant fear of terrorism. The general parameters of a long-term two-state agreement are well known. The President writes, "There will be no substantive and permanent peace for any peoples in this troubled region as long as Israel is violating key United Nations resolutions, official American policy, and the international roadmap for peace by occupying Arab lands and oppressing the Palestinians. Except for mutually agreeable negotiated modifications, Israel's official pre-1967 borders must be honored, as were all previous administrations since the founding of Israel. United States government leaders must be in the forefront of achieving this long-delayed goal of a just agreement that both sides can honor." Tonight, to talk about this, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have Professor George Bisharat. Professor George Bisharat graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School in 1983. He holds a BA in anthropology, UC Berkeley in 1975, a master's in history from Georgetown University in 1979, and a PhD in anthropology and Middle East studies from Harvard University in 1987. Recently, George wrote an article entitled Carter's Truths, and I'm just going to read a few paragraphs out of it. It says, "Americans owe a debt to former President Jimmy Carter for speaking long-hidden but vital truths. His book, Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid, breaks the taboo bearing criticism in the United States of Israel's discriminatory treatment of Palestinians. Our government tacit acceptance of Israel's unfair policies causes global hostility against us. Israel's friends have attacked Carter, a Nobel laureate who has worked tirelessly for Middle East peace, even raising the specter of anti-Semitism. Genuine anti-Semitism is abhorrent, but exploiting the term to quash legitimate criticism of another system of racial oppression and to tarnish a principled man is indefensible. Criticizing Israeli government policies, a stable in Israel newspaper, is no more anti-Semitic than criticizing the Bush administration is anti-American." George, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, Hesham.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I said thank you for having me on.
Yes, great. Of course, George was with us, I believe, a couple of months ago, and we wanted to bring George so we can talk about Carter's book. But before we start with that, George, you used a word, and I found it a little when you said, let me see if I can find it. Here we go. Our government's tacit acceptance of Israel's unfair policies. I mean, using the word tacit, it's like, you're saying it's implied, it's not really the policy of the United States to basically agree with what Israel is doing. Is that what you meant by using that word?
Well, Hesham, sometimes it pays to be polite and discreet.
Okay.
And I suppose that's what I was trying to do. I think that there are certain aspects of Israeli policy that the United States strongly supports and overtly and explicitly supports. So, for example, the United States was quite explicit about helping the Israeli invasion of Lebanon this past summer, and was very explicit about providing it diplomatic cover to prosecute that war. There are other aspects of Israeli policies that that probably trouble many American officials, but they don't say anything to stop them. So I think there's probably a little of each, and it depends on which particular policy you might be talking about. I don't, for example, even our U.S. State Department records and registers disapproval of many of Israel's internal policies with respect to the Palestinians, and reports in the annual human rights reports on Israeli violations of the rights of Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel.
Okay. Now, George, what exactly, it's Jimmy Carter is coming under a tremendous amount of pressure now about his book, and I read his book, and all I can find in it is historical facts that were already there, and his personal diaries of what happened between him and other leaders in meetings. So what's the big deal? This stuff was out there for years and years. What's the big deal about Jimmy Carter saying it?
Well, there are two things I think that are a big deal. One is that it is Jimmy Carter and not a lesser figure. Carter obviously is a person who's dear to many Americans and who many Americans remember with pride. Of course, in some respects, he's had an even more distinguished career after leaving office than during office. So, the fact that this particular eminent American who has no blood ties to either group is saying this kind of thing is a very significant thing. The other truly I think the truly controversial aspect was the title, Peace, Not Apartheid. That the A word, I think, that excited a great deal of controversy. And I think the reason that it did so is that Israel's supporters in this country are extremely fearful of Israel being labeled in that way and ultimately being subjected to the kind of treatment that South Africa was during the apartheid era.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the title, and Peace, Not Apartheid. Do we have an apartheid system that Israel is imposing against the Palestinians?
Well, are you asking me, or are you asking me about President Carter's opinion?
No, I'm asking you.
Well, I think it can be fairly described as a system of apartheid. Yes. Particularly with reference to the occupied territories. I think if we were only looking at the status of the Palestinian citizens of Israel, then we would say it's more like the status of African Americans during the Jim Crow era in the United States, in the pre-civil rights period in the United States. Of course, depends a little bit on how you want to define apartheid. And different people take different views of it. And of course, on the one hand, it does refer to the system of government that was in place in South Africa up until the major change and the beginning of majority rule there. But it also refers more generally to any system of discrimination between one group and another that, in particular, that relies on laws and regulations and legal discrimination. And if you take that general definition, then I think what goes on in the occupied territories and perhaps even within Israel itself is fairly described as apartheid.
Okay. Now, he also mentioned that he does not mean or did not mean when he used the word apartheid that based on racism. And he said that Zionism is not racism, and that's not what he meant, that it was based on race. So if the apartheid that Carter referred to in his book was not based on race, then it was based on what, in your view?
Well, I believe it is. I disagree with President Carter on this point. I believe that it is based on race or nationality, however, ethno-nationality, however you choose to view it. As much as I respect President Carter and appreciate what he's done in opening up debate on these matters, there are some things that I disagree with him about, and this is one. His claim was that it wasn't racism, rather it was greed for land, talking about the Israeli settlement drive, colonization of the West Bank. And what that overlooks is the fact that Palestinian land is being taken and transferred to Jews for exclusive Jewish settlement. And that is a racially based system. And so it's not just greed for land out of some economic desire or seeking enrichment. There's a political and racially tinged aspect to the whole settlement project.
Okay.
Moreover, there is very strong racism evident in Israeli laws and policies within the state of Israel itself, and Israeli attitudes, I'm sad to say, are quite racist as well. And I'd be happy to give you some data on that if you like.
Sure.
Well, there have been a number of polls that have been taken recently of Israeli public opinion. I think I cited some of them in the article that you were quoting from. What they indicate is that Israelis have very strongly negative attitudes toward Arabs. For example, something like 2/3 of them would not want to live in the same building as an Arab. Many of them believe that many people in these polls respond that they support policies by the Israeli government to cause Arab citizens to emigrate from the country. And you might say to yourself, okay, well, these things are the product of the conflict and fear and the fact that there is a security threat and Israeli Jews are not able to tell maybe a Palestinian from the occupied territories who might be a suicide bomber from one of their own Palestinian citizens. But then there's a poll that I read about recently in the Jerusalem Post, which revealed that 75% of Israeli youth, high school students in a poll, believe that Arabs are unclean. Now that's not linked to conflict, at least not very directly. That's out and out racism. And these things are pretty much taken for granted in Israeli society. Unfortunately, they're, until President Carter's book, mostly taken for granted in this country as well.
Okay. Now, he was last week, he was at Brandeis University, and in his speech that lasted about 15 minutes, about the first 7 minutes, it was nothing but telling the audience what had he done for Israel. It's almost, I don't want to say he sounded apologetic, but he sounded like, why are you coming down so harsh on me? Look what I have done for Israel. And then he also, as a matter of fact, he challenged them. He said it would be an intriguing experience for a group of Brandeis professors and students to visit the occupied territories for a few days, to meet with leaders and private citizens, and to determine whether I have exaggerated or incorrectly described the plight of the Palestinians. I see him standing up, and I'm sure there's some pressure from the Democratic Party on him. Especially we have a presidential election coming up, in a couple of years, less than 2 years. So, I see him standing up, but at the same time, I see him catering, saying, look at me, why are you coming so hard on me? And as you know, 13 of his board of directors in the Carter, in his organization,
right?
They basically resigned. So can you tell me? I know I have given you a lot of. I don't know what the question is. The question is he being titled an anti-Semitic, and how is he taking that title? What is he doing? Is he standing up, or you see him caving down?
I see him mostly standing his ground very courageously. I think it's not unreasonable for him to take the stance that he did in a location like Brandeis University, which is a predominantly Jewish institution, both in terms of faculty and administration and students who attend the place. I think he was being conciliatory and generous, but I think on the substance he has not backed down 1 inch. And in his media appearances, and he's written a couple of op-eds in the Los Angeles Times and in the Washington Post. He's been quite forthright, and he really has not backed down. So I think he's done a really great job, and I'm very impressed with him.
Now, in a couple of minutes, if I tell you to summarize what did he really say in the book, just in general terms, what exactly his message in the book?
Well, he's saying that Israel is setting up a system of apartheid in the occupied territories, whereby Jews live in settlements, they travel on separate roads from Palestinians, they live under a different legal regime than the Palestinians, and they enjoy greater land resources, greater water resources. They vote in Israeli elections, whereas Palestinians don't vote in those elections, notwithstanding the fact that the Israeli government basically still determines their fate. And all of those things are creating more acute conflict and are increasing the likelihood of greater violence and strife and jeopardizing the futures of both peoples. That, I think, is his basic message.
Okay. Now, also in that speech at the university, he said, "I have never claimed that American Jews control the news media. That's ridiculous to claim. But I have reiterated that our nation's overwhelming support for Israel comes from among Christians like me who have been taught since I was 3 years old to honor and protect God's chosen people, from among whom came our own Christian Savior, Jesus Christ." Is this, are we seeing the end of the Christian right movement here? Because he's definitely coming out in daylight and saying, wait a minute, what you're teaching is wrong. And I went there, this is reality on the ground. Is this, do we see this as the beginning of the end for the Christian right, or no?
That would be a little too hopeful, I'm afraid. I think it will be very interesting to see how his stance is received in the Christian Zionist community. The problem, I'm afraid to say, I don't mean to be disrespectful to any of your viewers, but I think that that contingent doesn't really see the situation over there in logical terms. They see them in theological terms, and they are not as susceptible to reason and fact and logic as some other people. But some of them surely will be, and I think some of them probably will listen and take President Carter seriously. So I think that's very that will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Okay. But definitely it's going to put a little dent in that movement, probably the start of maybe a rebellious movement within that movement. Let's hope.
I hope it does. That would be very intriguing to follow, and it may have some of that effect. Just a very brief thing. President Carter, of course, is correct that Jews do not control the media in this country. However, the Israel lobby does exert a strong influence on the media in this country, and it's not a coincidence that it took a former president, a person who's not running for office, has great stature, to say the kinds of things that he is saying. These kinds of statements cannot be made in today's political environment by people who are actually in office. I regret to say, because they fear for their political lives if they do so. And in the media, it's not absolutely impossible for these perspectives to be heard. I mentioned the fact that the LA Times and the Washington Post both published op-eds by Jimmy Carter, but it's darn hard. It's very difficult, and there's a lot of opposition, and it takes a lot of pushing in order to get these perspectives heard.
Okay. Now, you did mention the Israel lobby. Jimmy Carter continues saying, an additional factor, especially in the political arena, is the powerful influence of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, which is exercising its legitimate goal of explaining the current policies of Israel's government and arousing maximum support in America for those policies. Now, lobbying is a legal it's legal in the United States. But now when Jimmy Carter says that they are exercising its legitimate goal of explaining the current policies, now is what AIPAC doing is legit?
Well, I would say that most of it appears to be legal. Of course, you know that 2 of its members are currently under indictment for passing state secrets, basically, to Israel. But I'm sure that most of what it does is legal. Whether it's legitimate is a slightly different question. I think it's this is the system. This is the system that we have. It's the way it operates. I think there's a lot of unfairness in it. I think the system currently favors people who have money and people who are organized. And the result of the lobbying effort is, of course, it's not simply to explain. Rather, it's basically to convince and, or if necessary, coerce people to vote in a particular way.
Okay.
And yeah, and that's
now, let me.
The effect of that is quite unfortunate. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, let me take an issue with that because what AIPAC is doing, its tactics, it's what they actually do on the ground, basically for a foreign country. What they're doing is not, you can lobby the United States Congress for American interests, but when you are a foreign entity, and AIPAC is more of a foreign entity than anything else, and buying the influence of our congressmen and women, how could that be legal, George?
Well, we have a very flawed electoral system and political system that permits this to be done, and it's done by lots of different special interest groups.
So basically, if you have money, you can buy the best government.
The most favorable policies is to your interests is the way I would put it. I don't think that's the best government.
Well, the best government for me, if I'm buying it. So you can get the
correct.
influence, and basically, if you have money, you can. Now, is that how the United States Constitution, is that how it was set up? Is that what was meant by lobbying, to basically buy your influence through the halls of Congress?
I'm not aware that the Constitution says anything about lobbying as such, and I don't think that was what was contemplated. But that is the system that we have evolved, and I think it is in very serious need of reform. Now, you're probably aware that Congress did. The 111th Congress, as one of its first acts, was to try to pass some new ethics legislation. I just want to point out that legislation was strongly, I'm not going to say protested, but aspects of it were strongly protested by the Israel lobby, because they were very fearful that one of their favorite tools, which is the free political junket to Israel, was going to be made illegal. And they succeeded in influencing the legislation in such a way as to not have that happen. So that Congressman Barney Frank, who is strongly pro-Israel, basically guaranteed to people in the Israel lobby that this would not happen. That the effect of the legislation would not be to curb these trips to Israel for American politicians.
Okay. Explain one more thing for me, George. Now, Carter did say that it's ridiculous to claim that the Jews control the media, and you agreed with him. And I had other guests here, like James Abu Rizq, for instance. He also agreed that they don't control it, and he preferred to use the word influence. Yeah. Now, to me, I have used the word control. Maybe it's an English thing here, the difference between influencing and controlling. But if the end product is the same, does it really matter if we play with these words or not? Knowing that in Europe, for instance, because the media is behaving differently than in the United States, you have like over 79% of Europeans said that Israel was the #1 state in the world that is, dangerous for world peace. They named it before North Korea, before Iran, before Syria, before all these countries that we in the United States think as dangerous countries because of the media. So, does it really matter if we say controlling the media or influencing the media if the end product is the same?
Well, it makes a huge difference. It has implications for what we do, those of us who aren't pleased with this situation. If Jews control the media, then there's really not much that can be done. But I want to just be. I'll go further with that. But I want to point out that I believe the phrase "Jews control the media" is wrong in two senses. Control is wrong, and Jews is wrong. So let me. The influence means that they exert pressure, and they're sometimes able to have critical voices excluded, but not always. And I would point out, for example, that James Abu Rizq had a piece in the Christian Science Monitor just a couple of days ago, actually, I think on the 26th,
yes,
that talked about this very issue of congressional reform and the failure of that reform to deal with the junkets to Israel. So, his voice was heard in a fairly influential newspaper. So, if there is control, then there's, really not much we can do but sit around and wring our hands and complain. If it's influence, then those of us who have a different perspective need to get off our tails and work hard and make sure that the alternative voices are provided to the media. But then the other thing that I want to make sure that at least your viewers understand about my perspective, we're not talking about Jews. We're talking about supporters of Israel. There are lots of Jews who don't like many of the policies of Israel. There are some who don't believe in the idea of a Jewish state. These are not the people who are exerting influence over the media. It's the minority of people, and it tends to be the leadership. Much of it, the leadership of the of the establishment Jewish organizations, and working sometimes in concert with the Israeli government. I don't know if you saw my piece, Hesham, that was in the Houston Chronicle a few days ago, but I related in that, I came across a transcript of a discussion that was held, a briefing that was held by an Israeli government spokesman in 2000. His name is Nachman Shai, and these were verbatim notes of a discussion that he was having with 30 to 60 Jewish leaders, in which he was describing the Israeli PR effort in the United States, and he was talking specifically about placing pressure on CNN to try to get several of its reporters replaced with pro-Israeli reporters, and that's almost exactly what he said. So it's it's the Israeli government, and it's the contingent within the Jewish community, and including non-Jews who work sometimes in coordination, apparently, and sometimes of their own volition. So, it's influence, and it's.
So what you're saying, it's influence, but they're trying to control it.
Yes, sure.
Okay. All right, tell you what, we're going to go to the phones.
Control, yeah.
We're going to go to the phones with Curtis from Texas. Go ahead, Curtis.
Yeah, Dr. Tillawi, good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Bisharat, good evening. My question is, when do you think that Americans are going to quit dancing around the issue of whether or not ethnic Jews or Zionists dominate or monopolize the media? It seems to me that even the slightest amount of research proves that conclusively. Even black entertainment television, or BET, isn't owned by a black. It was purchased by Murray Rothstein, who's also known as Sumner Redstone some years ago. And Haim Saban, an Israeli Jew, owns Univision, the largest Spanish-language television network in the United States. And Haim Saban also is the largest donator to U.S. politicians as a single individual of all time. And it seems to me that until we can convince 290 million Gentiles in the United States that, in fact, it's true that Zionists do monopolize and have a veritable stranglehold on the media, that most of what we do is an exercise in futility. And that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Curtis, thanks for your question. I obviously disagree with you, not categorically, but in I guess I would say in degree, and I think degree actually is important. You're right. If the conclusion is that they control or have a stranglehold, then what we do is an exercise in futility. But I don't believe that, and that hasn't been my experience. I have been working hard to have my writings placed in major American newspapers over the last few years, and I've succeeded quite often. Not always, and not always the way I want to, but my pieces get published. There are other writers who are getting in, and I think this, the very significance of the Carter book is that it suddenly makes it legitimate and possible for people to say things that haven't been said for quite a while. So it's I'm aware of Haim Saban. He's the guy who said in a New York Times interview that he's a one-issue guy and his issue is Israel. And I'm aware that he's the largest single donor to the Democratic Party, and of his ownership of media. I don't mean to underestimate or minimize the extent of the influence, but the fact of the matter is that it's not complete. And while there's still space for alternative perspectives to be voiced, we really have a responsibility to make sure that they do get voiced.
Let's go back to Carter and his book. He did mention, and he talked a lot about the wall that Israel is building. And, when he talks about things on the ground, like, for instance, the checkpoints that he himself had to go through, and the other checkpoints that he had witnessed there, and the wall, and, how is these affecting the lives of the Palestinians there in Palestine? Tell me, what's the wall is doing to Palestinian lives?
Well, it's ruinous to many Palestinians. I remember reading a year or two back. I'm not sure how these figures have changed, but something like 700,000 Palestinians' lives are directly impacted by the building of the wall. There are something like 250,000 Palestinians who are going to be trapped on the so-called Israeli side of the wall, in other words, west of the wall. There are some Palestinian villages that are virtually completely surrounded by the wall. They're separated from their lands. And, of course, we're not talking just the wall, which is, it's a 25-foot-high concrete wall in many places. In some places it's just a fence. But it has a very wide footprint. It's not just the wall itself, but the space around the wall is quite wide, and there are roads and electronic monitoring and all guard towers and all this business. And the thing, if built to its full length, is going to be something like 625 miles long, something like 450 miles long. Most of it is built on Palestinian land that has been expropriated. And of course, the wall is just the kind of the most obvious and the most severe of the means of restricting Palestinian freedom of movement within their own land. These checkpoints are not just at so-called border crossings between Palestinian and Israeli areas. The number sort of varies, but I think now there are roughly 540 or so of these checkpoints that are operative within the West Bank, and they make it impossible for Palestinians to travel from one Palestinian city or village to another. And it has brought economic life, it's brought social life, it's to a halt. It's made it impossible for kids to get to schools, for patients to get to doctors and hospitals, for people to visit other family members, and it's just made life hell for many, many, many Palestinians.
So it's not just the wall, it's also these checkpoints. I mean, we're looking at some of these pictures on the screen where an ambulance is, I guess, being stopped at one of the checkpoints, and there's an old lady probably trying to get to the hospital. Do you know of any fatalities that have taken place on these checkpoints where women could not get to healthcare facilities to deliver their babies, or kidney patients dying, or people having heart attacks or anything? Do you have any information on that?
Yes, I don't have the precise numbers at my fingertips at the moment, but it strikes me that somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or so, maybe more, Palestinians have died at checkpoints. People who have been seeking health care, whether women, pregnant women, or other sick people unable to reach health care, have died. And of course, there are God knows how many people who have been shot and killed by Israeli soldiers or beaten. And of course, humiliation by these young soldiers who man these points is just sort of part of daily life.
Now, the other major issue that he spoke about, or he wrote about, is the settlement, and he's saying that since the 10 years back, the settlements have, or the population in the settlements have basically increased about tenfold. Now there are I guess it's about 1 million people in those settlements. Do you know anything about it?
I don't believe that figure is accurate. To the best of my knowledge, the current number of settlers in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is about 435,000.
Okay, so it's just a little less than 500,000.
Yes.
Okay, now these settlements are scattered all over Palestinian territories, the West Bank. Of course, they left Gaza. They're not in Gaza anymore. But he also mentioned something which is not just the settlement that is the problem, but also these roads that are connecting the settlements, which basically end up taking a lot more land than what the settlement itself is taking. And
right.
Palestinians can't travel on these roads. What problem would something like this, present for the Palestinians?
Well, you're right. The roads themselves are wide, and there are security zones that surround the roads, which expand the area of land that essentially no longer can be used by Palestinians. The same is true, by the way, of the settlements themselves. There's the actual footprint of the settlement, that is the land that's built up and where the homes and other businesses and things are. But then there's a wide swath of land around it that's supposed to be to provide a security zone. So all of these things have a much greater impact, and that impact being to make land off limits to the Palestinians that they otherwise would have used, that belongs to them, than would otherwise be the case.
he also mentioned something that a couple of years back, I guess it was Ariel Sharon who said that we need to take every hilltop in the West Bank, and a lot of these settlements started popping up all over the place there. But Carter mentioned something that raw sewage from these settlements normally flows down to the Palestinian villages, and it's affecting the fresh water or whatever water is left for the Palestinians to drink. Is that causing any problems, any health problems for the Palestinians, or are we looking for an epidemic later on with this untreated raw sewage coming down on these villages?
I'm sure that's so, Hesham. Yeah, I mean, you know, there are many negative effects of these settlements. I mean, you know, there are of course many Israeli settlers who live in these settlements for economic reasons. The Israeli government has induced them to settle there by offering low interest loans and subsidies and all kinds of benefits. But there are other settlers who are there because of ideology, because they believe that this is land that has been promised to the Jewish people, and they intend to take it and seize it and keep it. And the attitude of these settlers toward the Palestinians is terrible. And of course, Israelis are permitted in the occupied territories to carry arms, and they do so. There's a very severe problem of settler violence, vigilante violence, and just just racist violence. Frankly, your viewers may recall in 1994 that the American immigrant to Israel, Baruch Goldstein, went into the Ibrahimiyya Mosque in Hebron and shot to death 29 people before being killed himself. So these are Hebron is the place where these confrontations are the worst and the most recurrent. But throughout the West Bank, these Israeli settlers, this ideological component of them, just behaves terribly toward the Palestinian population.
Okay. Now, going back to Carter's book, George, and I've seen Carter's on a lot of interviews, and basically he keeps repeating the word debate, that all he wants is to start a debate, that there's not enough debate in Congress, there's not enough debate on the streets of the American cities, and he keeps saying that we need to debate this issue. Now, some Americans might be watching and saying, what is it? What's in it for us? Why do we need to debate the Israeli-Palestinian issue?
Do you want me to answer that?
Please.
Well, we as a nation are very directly involved in that conflict, unfortunately, and not as an honest broker, but rather as an ally of Israel. And we have for 34 years or so provided a minimum, let's say an average of about $3 billion a year in military and economic aid to Israel. So it's really our tax dollars and our weapons, our Apache helicopters, our Cobra helicopters, our various other arms that make the ongoing occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip possible, and that make the ongoing settlement of the West Bank possible. And, Palestinians are a highly educated and highly politicized lot. They're aware that this is so. So is the rest of the world, and so are, a majority of people in the Arab and Muslim worlds, and they don't like it. They resent U.S. support of Israel. And this is causing hostility against us throughout the world. And this is something that all Americans need to take seriously. On the eve of the last presidential election in 2004, Osama bin Laden issued a videotape in which he said that the first time he ever envisioned towers falling in the United States was as he was watching the Israeli army bombard downtown Beirut in 1982. And just a couple of weeks ago, John Negroponte, our intelligence czar, was giving the annual U.S. threat estimate, and he ranked the Lebanese group Hezbollah number 2 on the list, and that's it hadn't been there before. And he said this is because they're mad at us because of what we did in supporting the Israeli invasion of Lebanon last summer. Well, all of us ought to really sit up and take notice of these things and say, look, our interests are being jeopardized. People are beginning to target us. Why? Because of our support for Israel. Now, if that support were for a positive cause, then, we would be justified in telling the world, go stick it in your ear. But in fact, what's going on in Israel is in occupied territories, in the occupation, is the imposition of a system of government that would be abhorrent to most Americans, one that violates our fundamental principles of equal rights and democracy. And, there's just no reason that we should be doing that. It doesn't serve the interests of the peoples there. It just produces more conflict, and it makes us hated throughout the world. And we are paying the price for it. And we need to wake up, and Americans need to take ownership of this conflict that we think is far away and doesn't have anything to do with us, but in which we're very, very directly involved.
Okay. One final question. We have a couple of minutes left. Do you think what Carter wants to do is start a debate? Do you see that debate succeeding in the coming years, or in a couple of years or so?
Well, that depends greatly on us, those of us who take alternative views. I think it probably will take. The Israel lobby has been at work for decades, and they have a lot of resources, and they're very effective. They're very smart. They're very committed. They work very hard, and it's not going to be. The effects of their decades of work are not going to be reversed overnight. But if we don't start now, we're really going to be in trouble. I do see, that things are happening, and there are a number of pieces that have been appearing, op-eds that have been appearing in support of Carter, and I'm sure we're going to see more of that. And I think he has, he has opened the door, and it's up to the rest of us to crowd in behind him and push through.
Very quickly, in 20 seconds, why, someone might say, well, if the Israelis are doing it, why don't you have a Palestinian lobby instead of have Israel lobby? Why you don't have a Palestinian lobby?
Well, by some estimates, there are a mere 70,000 Palestinians in the United States. There may be double that, but it's still a small number, not a particularly wealthy community as compared to other communities here. And just not enough years on the ground and experience in this society in being effective.
Very good. George, I only have time to say thank you for coming on the program. It has been a pleasure having you on tonight.
Thank you, Hesham. You take care.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, when we come back in the second hour, it's just going to be you and I, and we will be speaking about the greatness of America, how great our nation is. So when we come back, I want a lot of phone calls because I'm sure you will enjoy what we will have to say about how great the United States is. Have we seen a reduction in that greatness or more? I want you to tell me what you think. So we will be back in 5 minutes with how great America is. Don't go too far. See you then.
I'm Jim Richard.
And I'm Joel Vasson, and we're with Goodwill Industries of Acadiana. We're mostly known throughout Acadiana for our 6 retail sites located throughout, as well as our 5 attended donation centers. We're very pleased, and it's wonderful to live in such a generous environment called Acadiana. In our 6 retail stores, you can find some of the best bargains in town. Just to give you an idea on some of our pricing, all of our infants and toddler clothing is $1.99. Our children's clothing is $2.99. Our adult basics such as shirts, shorts, pants, and skirts are all only $4.59. What we do with the funds that we generate through our retail stores is provide services to those in need in our communities. Here in Acadiana, we have served over 28,000 people since coming to Acadiana. Some of the services we provide are substance abuse, domestic abuse. We also do a lot of programs with our youth and our elderly. In addition, we have housing for elderly and those with disabilities. So the funds that we generate in our retail stores go right back into the community in the form of services. In addition to that, we also do some special fundraising events. So Jim, why don't you tell us about some of our fundraising events?
All right, thank you, Joe. The biggest fundraiser by far is the Cajun Comic Relief. It's going to be held next year in March. Again, we have a great lineup of entertainment already coming. We have Thelma Deckle. She's a local. She's been doing comedy for like 25 years. Her family was always known as a big joke, so she should fit in real well. Louis Russo is one of the world's best ventriloquists. He's been doing it for 40 or 50 years. He's an extremely well trained ventriloquist. They just had the ventriloquist week on David Letterman, and Louis was quite impressed with some of the new talent coming on. Again, he's going to be there. And then we have this group called Louisiana Purchase. They're better known for their singing talents, but their comedy is much better than their singing ever thought about being. They're the only Cajun comic quartet in the world. And then we have John Morgan, who everybody knows that he went to USL, or as it was back then, USL, and he was student body president, and he's a professional comedian. He tours about 40 weeks a year, and he was here last year, and as soon as he got off stage, he says, I want to come back, you know, let me come back. So again, we're having him back. We have great pre-show entertainment. So again, it encompasses a whole lot. We have a lady called Connie Garrett who's going to be a Tina Turner impersonator, and we also have Angeli, the family band. So again, come out and enjoy yourselves. You'll hear more about it later. Thank you.
The University of Louisiana at Lafayette is the second largest university in the state, a bold leader in areas like computer science, biology, nursing.
Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. In this hour, ladies and gentlemen, I decided not to have a guest, so it's just going to be you and I, and we're going to talk about what's going on in America now and how great this country is, and what can be done about the problems that we're having in the country. But before we go there, let's talk about war first. As General Sherman wrote the White House, this was during the Civil War, And he said war is hell. And I read a few things about what went on during the Civil War. And I'm thinking, has the mentality of people really changed with the introduction of modern things? Has the civilization really changed a lot when it comes to how we look at war and how we accept war and what happens during the war? As most of us, we studied American history, and as most of you out there, we very much, learned that the Civil War basically was so Lincoln wanted to free the slaves, and that's what a lot of people out there, at least that's how it was sold probably at that time or later,